Hi guys, thank you for coming to part 2. If you haven't seen the first part, make sure to check it out. Previously, FL's maid unknowingly drugged her bathwater in an attempt to help the female lead's relationship with the male lead. That mistake brought a crazy night between the two of them. Just as our male lead had been trying to avoid, he lost control despite FL's pleas for them to take a break. He kept going, leading her to accept she was only just a tool to produce an heir. She can't expect anything more, just surrender this body to him and don't think about anything else. Now the manhwa continues. After offering her a cup of water, he brings up the incident of the previous night, and with a smile she assures him that it's okay. She understands why he acted that way. Startled, he asks what she means, and she explains that the previous day at the palace, she acted passionately towards him, so at night, approaching her lovingly would naturally align with that act. With her gaze lowered, she retorts, "See, Your Highness, I didn't misunderstand. As per your original request, Your Highness, I will not harbor any feelings for you beyond having a child." Hearing her words, his heart immediately sinks. Clenching his fist, he wonders why he's so shocked. Isn't this what I wanted? I could lose control at any moment. What happened yesterday could happen again. Replying to Hinel, he remarks that she's obedient, commenting that it's good. Without wasting any more time, he takes his seat and inquires about her health. In response, she assures him that she's fine. She also adds that she'd come late the previous night, which might have gotten him upset, so if he needs her from that moment on, she'll come to the palace immediately. The prince, with his brows furrowed, repeats, "Immediately?" Rethinking the scene of Cheddar's betrayal in her past life, she thinks it'll be better to have a child before he loses control like Cheddar did. Without meeting his gaze, she agrees and states she wishes to have a child as soon as possible because that is all she desires. The prince in response mentions that if that's all she desires, she'll need to be prepared. Without wasting time, she reveals that she's ready, and he tells her to come to his chamber that night, saying even if she's as tired as she was yesterday, he wouldn't let her off the hook, and she nods in agreement. Once he gets out, he buries his head in his palm in frustration. However, before he can organize his feelings, his assistant comes to him with a report, hesitation evident as he shares the news. He reveals he'd heard the maids whispering amongst themselves and then thought to ask them. Apparently, it turned out there was something inside the bathwater. The prince appears shocked as he mentions Sal's sedative? His assistant then explains that it acts as a potent aphrodisiac for men, although he's never heard of it being used in bathwater. But regardless of its effect, it's a drug used by the royal family. Could it be that the princess consort used it to seduce you? His assistant asks. At this point, the prince's mind reels. Come to think of it, he'd noticed a strange scent in the bathroom the previous day. Was that the sedative? He wonders. Now piecing it together, he realizes it wasn't the dark aura causing his loss of control, instead it was the drug affecting his reasoning. His assistant protests that using a drug on the prince mustn't go unpunished, and asks to know if anything had happened the previous day. The prince assures him that nothing had happened. Now a series of questions run through his mind. Hinel used a sedative on me, but why? Was it because she felt I wasn't proactive about having a child? Did she resort to this just to lure me in? But then, why did she treat me so coldly this morning? Despite his attempts to understand what might be going through her head, he fails to understand, so he decides that he must speak with her. At the same time, at the crown princess consort's room, her maid, Da, angrily speaks. She notes that even if the prince is annoyed, he shouldn't treat the crown princess consort in that manner, but Hinel again mentions that it's fine, stating that as the prince's wife, it is her duty. Looking at the paper, she reflects on how it's something she resolved to do from the start. The relationship is exactly as expected. Now she only thinks of writing a letter to her mother and Nya, telling them she's doing well, wondering how both mine and the Count are doing. Recalling how injured Count Phil was, she can't help but imagine how shocked they must have been to see him in such a state. As she writes, Da shares her predicament. She heard she'll be visiting the prince's palace that day, revealing she'd used up all the perfume the previous day. Should we buy more? Making a sharp turn to Da, she asks, perfume? Holding up the empty vial, she stands looking embarrassed while Da explains that she'd sensed the prince was in a bad mood, so she thought maybe a pleasant scent could improve his mood. Holding the bottle, Hinel reflects on how it is the drug that made Cheddar ounce like a wild beast, with just one drop. Now as she grasps the bottle in her hand, she understands it is because of his drug his mind was affected the previous night, and she now questions, then perhaps, was there any sincerity in this? I shouldn't have hoped for that. At night, the prince sits alone at the dinner table awaiting Hinel, who appears to be later than usual. The prince awaiting her arrival only questions if perhaps it's because of the discussion they had that morning that she's late now when the arrival of the princess consort is announced. The prince turns his head sharply as he orders them to let her in. The next moment, Hinel's footsteps are heard as she approaches gracefully, and when she stops, she asks, "Your Highness summoned me?" Once she takes her seat, he reveals that he has something to say to her privately, dropping a subtle hint for the maids to take their leave. Looking around nervously, she wonders if perhaps he wants to speak about the incident of the previous day. Summoning the courage, she finally asks what he has to say, however he suggests they talk slowly, making sure they enjoy the meal in the process. She nods in agreement, however just as she's about to bring her spoon already filled with soup to her mouth, the prince's sharp tone cuts through the air. He reveals he'd heard something strange from the maid that morning. Something about her bath water being drugged. Realizing he also knows about the drug, she lets out a sigh, but that also helps her confirm something, that it was really because of the drug he turned out that way. Hinel speaks and mentions that it seems her maid had made a mistake. She shares that she only just learned the truth, that the maid mistakenly put medicine in the bath water, and also apologizes for everything. The prince, recalling the incident, can only think, damn it, just because of the maid's mistake. Gently placing his silverware on the table, he mentions that the mistake can't be overlooked, explaining that if one uses medicine in the palace, the person might be severely punished, adding that he'd almost gotten seriously injured. Hinel, at the thought of Da getting punished because of her, can only repeat his highness's words in fear. Punishment? She pleads with him to forgive her, stating it's her fault, so if she has to receive punishment, she'll take it instead. The prince, with a tone of indifference, then asks if she wishes for him to cover up the maid's great sin, if she wishes to die instead, but she doesn't respond. With a sigh he shares that he'll let it go this time, however she has to send her back to Salur, adding that she can no longer remain a royal maid. Startled, she repeats his judgment, and he explains that there are still too many shortcomings in serving the royal family. Looking at her, he mentions that this time it was just the wrong medicine, but there might be even bigger things happening in the future. Looking down, Hinel mutters a response. Although your highness, she seems to have many shortcomings, but... She recalls how Da had always cared for her ever since they were both little, bringing her desserts and snacks that they often shared together when the queen was away, because she wasn't allowed to have any. Da, who is like a sister to her in that deserted palace, now she questions how she can bring herself to send Da back alone when because of her she had to come to this faraway place. So she makes a bold request of the prince. She is the only person I can trust and rely on in this palace. I will control it well in the future, so please close your eyes and let it go this time. Hearing her mention, Da is the only person she can trust and rely on. A few memories of his past flashes in his mind, the times where he was lonely, and the times he watched the king share affection with his family. The prince agrees, stating he will let it go, however, if she makes him suffer like that again, there won't be a next time. He steps out of the room while she sits bewildered. A smile forms on her face as she acknowledges, his words are cold, but his highness is indeed a warm person. Even though it's not love. I think the two of us can be good friends. The next day, as Da helps her get ready, she asks if she'd spoken well with the prince the previous night. Hinel, with a bright smile, retorts that his highness is indeed a good person. Da surprised asks if it's really true, sharing that she gets startled every time she sees the prince. Hinel, lost in thought, thinks of getting something to thank the prince for not sending Da away. However, she's unable to settle on anything, with the only information she knows being an uncertain future. As she wishes she could at least get news from Salur, a thought pops into her mind. Turning to a scroll set on her bedstand, she realizes there might be a way to get information. She immediately rises, ordering Da to prepare new ink and pen for her. As she awaits Da, she deliberates on the other events that have happened. The prince chose her, so Mia had to marry Count Phil, so how is she living now? Squinting her eyes, annoyance evident. She deliberates on how he's the one who even kidnapped the princess who would become the imperial crown princess like her, so she doesn't think someone like that will treat Mia well. Maybe Mia will even experience what I experienced in the past. Even though she has a vague idea of what happened in her previous life, there's no guarantee that those same things will happen the same way, thinking since she came to Trico's it's been very different from her past life. Just in time, Da arrives with the ink. She asks who she's planning on writing to, and she discloses that she was going to write to her mother and Mia. She puts the pen to paper and thinks to inquire about Salur's situation. In a new scene, a knight reports to the other prince of the second prince's activities. He informs him that the second prince has been visiting the woman from Sal every night, and even the previous night, he brought the crown princess consort into his chambers. The prince, with his finger assisting his chin, remarks that he always pretends to be so perfect, however in the end, he's no different. The third prince decides to go pay a visit to the first prince and asks if it's true he's still not showing any signs of recovery, and the knight backs up the claim. With his hand resting on his head, he mutters that the fever is so frustrating. With sneer in his tone, he comments, if he's going to recover, he should, or if he's going to pass, he should at least do it quickly. It's as if death is teasing him by holding on to him ambiguously. Poor crown prince. In a new scene, some maids in the kitchen discuss that it seems like the prince is utterly captivated by the crown princess consort. They shower her with compliments, saying she's beautiful and also has a charm distinctively different from the Trico's people. She's so delicate, almost as though a mere breeze would blow her away. Their conversation is interrupted by Da, who announced her presence by clearing her throat. With a smile, Da deliberates on how the people's attitude towards her appears to have changed now that there are rumors that the second prince favors her. Remember guys, he didn't send her back to Salur. She turns to the maid and asks if the tea is ready, and she says yes. As she pours the tea, she shares that it is made from the freshly sprouted leaves of a tree called Naluniu. She continues, stating it is a tree that grows only in Salur and only royals and nobles are allowed to drink it. Teasingly, she mentions that it's a rare delicacy, so she should even think about sneaking a taste. The maid, shaken with fear, shares instantly that if she ever dared to drink the tea that the crown princess consort enjoys, secretly, the prince might cut off her hand. Da in response asks if he would really go that far, and the maid tells her she's only saying that because she doesn't know the prince's temper. Once they depart, Da can't help but question. He's certainly a scary man, but would he really be that cruel? On the other hand, the crown princess consort sits in her office trying to recall the major events that had happened around this time in her previous life. As she almost dozes off, it suddenly comes to her. The crown prince passed away. In her previous life, after the crown prince's death, the succession battle began in earnest. Of course, she thinks there's no guarantee the same future will play out the same way. However, if a succession battle does occur, she resolves she must help His Highness, Rutz, emerge victorious. However, she ponders, no, instead of helping His Highness Rutz, it would be better to drag down his competitors. The third prince is willing to stoop to any dirty tactics to claim the throne, and even though His Highness Rutz won in her past life, he suffered significant losses because of the third prince. Still seated in the office, she reaches a conclusion. This time, she needs to minimize the damages as much as possible. Moments later, Da walks in with the tea. Hinel takes a sip out of the tea before dismissing her, and when she's gone, she leans back on the chair, gazing at the roof while wondering how to bring down the third prince. Her mind drifts to the second prince as she looks outside the window. His Highness must be in the study right now. A few moments later, she stands in front of his office. His assistant comes out to check who it is and is startled by her presence. He asks why she's there and she shares that she's come to see the prince. He goes back in to speak with the prince, and when he gets back, he clears his throat before noting that only the crown princess consort may go in. When she goes in, she comments that it's so dark in there even though it's daytime. She finally notices him at the end of a turning with a welcoming smile as he retorts, "You've come." He asks if she really had to dress up so much just to come visit him in his study, but her response causes him to pause. She explains that since she was coming to see him she made an effort. "Does that displease you?" she asks. "What I mean is, you look beautiful," the prince states. She thanks him, and just as she's about to share the reason for her visit, he asks her to wait. Before that, he takes her hand, looking deep into her eyes with affection as if they're about to share a kiss. He runs his hand through her hair, picks the piece of thread stuck in it, and as he throws it aside he retorts, "How careless, walking around with something like this attached." Hinel on the other hand remains flustered from that brief interaction. She wonders how foolish, what was I expecting when a question pops in her mind, but in this dark place, how could you see that? The prince, back to their former conversation, asks what it is she wanted to ask. She reveals that she wants to learn how to ride a horse, and he asks why, all of a sudden. As she searches for a plausible excuse, she thinks she can't reveal that it's because to gather information from the imperial palace she has to interact with others, but they all just see her as the woman who came from Salur or the woman who wore that ridiculous dress. Finally, she explains that she'd heard women in trials enjoy horseback riding as well, adding that if she's able to learn to ride a horse, she's confident she wouldn't feel embarrassed later. The prince agrees, but he shares that he doesn't have time that day, but he'll call her when he can. Startled, she asks if he is going to teach her horseback riding himself. He asks if she was planning to learn horseback riding from someone else, and she responds saying he's busy after all. She asks if he wouldn't allow it because he doesn't trust her, and he says it's not that. Clasping his hands together, he tries to force the words out, but they won't come out, it's just. They only remain in his thoughts. If you're going to learn horseback riding, physical contact is essential. I'd rather teach you than see you in that situation. He doesn't share his reasoning behind his decision and only urges her to leave, stating he's already decided on it. The next day, Hinel walks with the prince, who asks if she really hasn't ever tried getting on a horse by herself. He then asks what they were teaching her in Salur then, while she only chuckles in response. He stops and then turns to her and mentions, firstly she needs to eat used to the horse first. He then suggests she approaches the horse slowly, as sudden moments might cause the horse to be startled. When she's close enough, she suggests she gently stroke the horse's neck. As she strokes the horse, she reflects on how it's the first time she's touched a horse up close. It's softer than she expected. The prince then notes that they move on to the next stage, where he teaches her how to get the horse, and she turns to him surprised, asking, "Already? You said you wanted to learn horseback riding, are you just going to pet the horse and leave?" He guides her to grab the reins tightly from the side of the horse, and the next, to try putting her left foot in the stirrup, and lastly, pull herself and get on the horse. He ends up helping her up onto the horse, enough so she's well balanced on it. She thanks him, but he mentions, next time he'll make her get on by herself. Then they move on to trying to move the horse by gently pulling the reins. She pulls it and asks if she's doing it correctly, but he only stares at her. The next moment, he bursts into laughter as he asks if she believes the horse will move like that. He tells her to add a little more force, to be confident, and she agrees. However, the next time she tries, she pulls the reins too hard, causing the horse to move at a great speed instantly. As it moves, she cries out to the prince, asking what she should do. Chasing after her, he tells her to slowly pull the reins back and lean her body backward. Closing her eyes, she tries pulling the reins as he'd said, and the next minute, the horse brings itself to a pause. The prince immediately goes to her asking if she's okay. Through her shock, she still manages to assure him that she's okay. Instead, she was only a little bit surprised. The prince, however, apologizes, taking blame for it. He reveals he's never taught someone to ride a horse before, adding that it seems the pace was too fast. He places his hand on hers, offering her soft reassurance. As he helps her down the horse, he scoffs, thinking he'd almost hurt Hinel instead of teaching. Patting her head, he mentions that next time, he'll get her a professional trainer. Lowering her head, she agrees with his suggestion. He suggests they rest for that day, and as he walks away, she can only think, "I never expected you, Your Highness, to worry so much about me." Placing her hand on her chest, she concluded, "At this rate, I'll keep getting my hopes up." A few days later, she rides with her personal trainer, who commends her learning ability. She suggests she rides around the area once again, around the hunting grounds. As she rides, a voice cuts through the air. "Who is it?" Turning to the side, she notices the third prince on his horse. With a smile, he sneers, "Noble princess, what brings you to such a place?" She greets him, but he doesn't reciprocate her kindness. Instead, he scoffs, "You wear ordinary clothes while riding a horse. I still clearly remember the dress you wore back then." He pleads with her not to misunderstand, saying it's just that she was so beautiful it left a lasting impression. Looking at the prince, she recalls how Ritz had told her he was the one who instigated her kidnapping with Cheddar, so he told her never to get close to the third prince. She also reflects on the rumors in her past life that Kyle Viant murdered the crown prince. Since he was involved in a kidnapping, she thinks it's highly likely that the rumors are true. To look into the matter, she resolves, she mustn't be estranged from the third prince. With confidence, she responds that it's an honor to know she left an impression on him. However, there are other things about her that are worth remembering. The third prince smirks. He mentions that unlike his older brother, she appears to be an interesting person, and then he follows with a question asking if she was on her way to the hunting grounds. She says no, and instead she only intended to look around that area and then return, as she's still not very skilled at horseback riding. The third prince, seizing the opportunity, asks if she has any interest in hunting, stating if she's okay with it, he'd like to teach her a bit about it. But her trainer interrupts. She explains that she thinks it'll be better for her to start hunting after gaining a bit more proficiency. The third prince, in response to her concerns, asks if she thinks he'll be crazy enough to make her draw a bowstring right away. Rather, he's just saying he wants to show her how it's done. The trainer turns to the crown princess consort and asks for her response, and Hinel, with a smile, tells her she's fine with it, adding that it might be a good opportunity to develop an interest in hunting. She has her instructor return before her, but after a while of roaming the hunting grounds, they don't find any suitable prey. The third prince retorts that he went through the trouble of bringing her there only to end up showing her nothing, but she says it's fine. Rather, she reveals part of the reason she joined him was to see if she could speak with him, since there haven't been many opportunities for that after all. Turning to her, he asks if there's anything she's curious about regarding him. With her gaze lowered, she recalls the many controversies surrounding the crown prince's death. Was it due to illness? Or was he poisoned by someone? She mentions she recently heard the crown prince is critically ill, adding that he must be in deep distress. The third prince in response continues, stating, and yet he seems to have contracted a very severe illness that even renowned physicians say it's a disease of unknown cause. Hinel can't help but notice how heartbroken the third prince looks. However, that thought only reminds her of what happened in her previous life. As soon as the crown prince died, the third prince accused His Highness Retz of murder, almost as if he was so certain that the crown prince had been murdered by someone. In the end, the one who emerged victorious was His Highness Retz, but Hinel then comments on the crown prince's condition, saying it appears to be quite critical, and the third prince agrees. He also adds that it wouldn't be surprising if he passed away at any moment, bringing up his palace complexion. He remarks that his body is wasting away, that even just looking at him is heartbreaking. Hinel, however, only appears startled. Now she understands, the reason there was so much controversy over the crown prince's cause of death in her previous life was now clear. Despite how shocking it was because the crown prince's condition hadn't been severe at all. Looking at the third prince, she questions if he's lying to her. However, she brushes it off, thinking there's no need for him to do so. So if his statements are true, she deduces that the crown prince's death might happen sooner than she knows it to be. The third prince, noticing her pale look, asks if perhaps she's feeling unwell, but she assures him it's nothing with a bright smile. Her ears catch something, and the moment she turns her head to check what it is, she spots the second prince riding on his horse towards them. He asks what they were doing together all alone there, but the third prince with a smirk asks what he believes they were doing. "Are you worried we might be up to no good together?" the third prince retorts sharply. The second prince orders him to get out of his sight immediately and never approach his wife again. The third prince then retorts that if anyone sees that, they'd think he forcibly dragged Her Highness the princess consort there. "As you wish, I'll get out of your sight. As for you, brother, try calming down that angry horse yourself." That sudden harsh whip brings the horse to panic, reading up immediately before throwing Hinel off into the ground. The prince immediately rushes to her to see if she's all right. Just as she mutters she's fine, the second prince notices her torn gloves. His gaze hardens and he immediately turns to find the third prince fleeing in the distance. Slowly his lips part open and he speaks. "That guy. I won't let him get away with this." Hinel, however, pleads with him not to go, saying if he does it will turn into a big fight. The prince, however, filled with rage, turns to her and mentions, "They're the ones who started the fight first, so why should I hold back?" With her teary eyes, Hinel mind reels. She mustn't let the fight between the two of them escalate because of her. What if His Highness loses his life while fighting the third prince? Latching on to him, she responds that she doesn't want him to get hurt because of her. "So please, don't go," she pleads. Her words bring unexpected calmness to the prince, who calls her name softly with his hand around her face. She asks if he wouldn't be going to the third prince and he agrees. As he helps her up, she comments that she hadn't known it'll be such a big deal to him if she got hurt. She shares that she was only a little worried. She mentions that they haven't even had a child yet. "But if you lose your life, Your Highness, how will I live alone in Trikas?" The second prince her races. It's not that she was worried about him. She was simply worried about not having a child. Now the second prince's gaze hardens. "Why are you so obsessed with having a child? Did someone secretly force you to have descendants?" She immediately denied it, stating it's nothing like that. Bringing her head low, she confesses. Maybe it's because she wasn't treated as a proper child by her father in Solur. She's always thought about having her own child. She adds that even though she's only just a princess in name, her child will grow up as a successor with love and recognition, lacking nothing. The second prince immediately goes calm. Somehow, with her statements, she reminds him of his mother. Suddenly, he asks her why she'd chosen him. Turning away, he adds even if he has her child, he wouldn't be recognized there and instead will just be ignored. Instead of explaining, she lets out a sigh, thinking, "No, Your Highness will definitely become the Emperor of Trikas and my child will be recognized as the Crown Prince. Even if the future changes from what I know, I will make sure it happens." The prince extends his hand towards her and asks, "Get on. It will be hard to ride in that condition, so get on my horse." As they ride together, the prince breaks the silence. He simply remarks that she seems shocked. She appears confused and he explains. He mentions she must have thought she'd live a life of wealth and glory if she became his wife, but she didn't know the man she chose as her husband is actually a burden to the palace. But it's too late to regret now, you're already my wife. However, Hinel softly calls his name and reveals she doesn't regret coming to him at all. Rubbing her head gently against his back, she adds, "Not once since I first met you have I regretted it." A smile forms on the prince's face as he thinks, he thought she'd be disappointed with his situation, however now. "You never regretted it, huh? Then as you wish, I'll make you pregnant as soon as possible. If I could I'd go to your bedroom tonight. But because of that kid Kyle, I'll have to wait until you're fully healed." Hinel however mentions she's not that hurt and he can come that night if he pleases, but he cuts her off immediately and asks that she stops talking nonsense. He insists, stating until she's fully healed he wouldn't lay a finger on her, insisting she gets proper treatment first. "Yes, Your Highness, I will." In a new scene, Da helps wrap up her wounds. Because of her concern, Hinel explains that it had happened due to her carelessness not daring to mention the third prince for now. She takes her leave when she's done, leaving Hinel alone in the room. Alone, she questions if perhaps going to the hunting grounds today was her mistake. She lowers her head thinking she provoked the third prince and caused a clash with Prince Rutz, and even though luckily nothing bad had happened, she notes she has to be more careful from now on. She hears some noise and turns around asking Da what's wrong, but before she can even respond, the second prince walks into her room. She immediately gets up and asks why he's there, and he responds saying if his wife is injured, he should come check on her. Hinel then shares the doctor's reports after his examination, that it'll be better if she has proper rest for now. The prince turns away saying he guesses there's no need to check it, but she asks him to stop. She shares that she'd heard from the third prince that day, that the crown prince's health isn't good. His gaze immediately hardens as he turns to her, but she doesn't notice and only considers, if the third prince and Rutz keep clashing like today, there might be a fight she doesn't even know about, and to prevent that she needs to make Prince Rutz wary of the third prince. Hinel however proceeds with a question. "What if the crown prince dies, and you're blamed for his death? What will you do, Your Highness?" But the second prince, having not expected that, only expresses his shock. "What? What do you mean by that?" She instantly clarifies that it doesn't mean anything special. Instead it's just, the crown prince is not in good health and his highness has a bad relationship with the third prince. With his gaze cold he responds that that's not something for her to worry about. He tunes around mentioning he should be taking his leave. As she faces the shut door, she deliberates, although she made him angry, it's better than saying nothing. As she looks she hopes he will be cautious of the third prince. On the other hand, Rutz walks down the hall, his mind filled with different thoughts. He told Hinel not to worry, but he can't deny her words aren't wrong. Killing his brother and framing him for it, Kyle would commit such an act without second thought. Since neither stealing his almoner nor kidnapping Hinel worked out, he considers that the third prince by now must be very anxious. He steps into his room and asks Evans if there's been any reports from the ones planted in the crown prince's palace. As he walks past him, he notes he should report everything that goes into the crown prince's palace. Before Evan steps out, he asks why he's asking for such information, and the prince without hesitation reveals Kyle might try to assassinate the crown prince. He adds that a person who is desperate to become the crown prince would do anything, and from the way he's been keeping an eye on him, it's not strange if he does something. He adds that the third prince must be anxious to be crowned crown prince before he gains the emperor's recognition. Then Evans asks, if there are signs someone is trying to harm the crown prince, will he stop them? A smile forms on his face as his movements halt. Why would I? If Kyle kills the crown prince, I can eliminate both at once, don't you think? He adds that the two children of the Empress taking each other's lives is a very favorable situation for him, so all he needs to do is watch and gather evidence. Evans retorts that he understands, and before taking his leave, he mentions he would make sure to report immediately if he notices any suspicious movements. On the other hand, Hinel lays sound asleep in bed. Her door slowly creaks open and the second prince walks in. He goes to her side and as he watches her a smile forms on his face, but that smile soon vanishes as a thought crosses his mind. If he loses to Kyle and dies, Hinel will. He leans in forward and as he caresses her cheeks, he retorts that no one will be able to touch what's his, because he'll make sure of it. A few days later, Evan stands with his arms crossed, questioning what he's looking at right now. Looking at the prince and Hinel, he comments. If he's going to do that, he might as well leave the palace. The prince on the other hand asks Hinel if she knows how clever horses are, stating that if she sits like that, they'll think she's scared and look down on her. Instead he adds that she shouldn't be soft-hearted and apologize to the horse. Rather he coaches her, when you pull, do so firmly, when you strike, strike decisively, and she responds she understands. Hinel also wonders why the prince is doing that since others are watching. Is he trying to show this to others on purpose? She turns to the prince and mentions that he doesn't have to do this. It's a bit embarrassing, she ends. The prince doesn't seem pleased with her request and only looks at her in search of answers when the horse suddenly rears up. Embarrassed, he urges the horse to calm down while Hinel bursts out laughing. The prince, confused, asks her if she's laughing now and she turns and replies, but it's the first time I've seen His Highness so flustered. The prince, captivated by her smile, questions. Has Hinel's smiling face always been this pretty, my Hinel? She's unable to hold his gaze and turns her head away, saying, she can't do it. She explains that other people are watching. He checks himself and then gets off the horse, saying then they'll have to go somewhere no one is looking. He picks her off the horse in an instant and places her on the ground. Let's go to a place where no one can see us. Evans, observing in the distance, lets out a sigh, stating he knew this would happen. Training, what about it? He questions. Inside, their tongues tangle in a slow, deliberate rhythm, each movement deepening the connection between them. His warm breath against her skin as his tongue traced along her skin. He asks if she wants to have a baby that quickly, and a short silence follows after. Yes, I want to have your highness's child soon, she responds, and he mutters okay as he leans in for another kiss. Lifting his shirt, he retorts. If I die, a successor is needed. Come and take my child, Hinel. Later, they lay in bed together as Hinel asks why he'd said such a thing earlier. That if he passes, a successor is needed. She adds that it's as if he's already thinking of death, but he softly reassures her. He states that he doesn't plan on dying alone and also leaving her alone in the palace. Then, her voice sharp. If the crown prince passes away and you win the succession struggle, then your highness will become the emperor of Trika's, right? The prince, however, warns her not to speak such words, carelessly explaining that if he who hasn't even been crowned crown prince was to become emperor, he could be accused of treason. I understand, she mutters before drifting fast to sleep, leaving the prince to organize his thoughts. Emperor, if I become emperor, Hinel will naturally become empress. If a child is born, then that child will become the crown prince. For the sake of preserving a single life, I who had been traversing to battlefields, am to become emperor. Holding her hair now, he mentions that somehow since the moment he'd met her, it's been nothing but a series of surprises. The memories of some of their moments flash in. The time they met, to the time he chose her as his bride, and also the time she was kidnapped. Looking at her, he declares. Hinel Flack, if you want something. The Emperor too. A few days later, Hinel sits on a couch visibly exhausted with Da, who offers her a cup of tea with hope that it'll bring her some relief. Just as soon as she sips out of it, they hear a knock on the door, and the next moment, Evans walks in. He reports that the prince has asked for her to be brought to the Empress Dowager. He advises her to hurry, sharing he heard it was an urgent matter, and she responds that she understands. After he takes his leave, she stands alone questioning, could something bad have happened to His Majesty? A few moments later, she arrives and is welcomed in. Evans orders for it to be brought forward, and the next moment, Da is in awe as her gaze sets on the fur coat seated carefully in the box. She holds it up, amazed by the sight, when a man walks in and asks if she likes it. She asks if the gift is for her, but he only asks if he should give it to her maid instead. Holding it, he shares that it's a cloak made from silver fox fur. Placing it around her, he remarks, "I brought it for you, so don't even think about returning it. It suits you well." She thanks him and states that she will make sure to dress appropriately so that no unpleasant events take place like the last banquet, but the prince barely listens to her and only signals for the next item to be brought forward. The maids bring out the next box, and the prince shares that he prepared that because she mentioned the measurements recently. The maid opens the box and her eyes land on the different jewelries and gems placed inside. She appears stunned as she considers how they're all rare items. Though she's heard of them, they're hard to see. The prince then asks that if she doesn't like any of them she should let him know, stating he will prepare them again, but she insists that she likes them. Also, he mentions that since she has the cloak on, it seems she can leave right away, explaining that he has something even more impressive he's prepared outside. He extends his hand to her and she accepts it without wasting time. Outside, she stands with her hand placed over her mouth as she meets the view of her horse. The prince turns to her and asks how she likes it. She asks if that's for her as well, and the prince says yes, especially since there doesn't seem to be any use bonding with the training horse. Her trainer suggests riding her new horse, however she's hesitant because of her attire, but the prince asks what's the harm there, adding that he'd chosen a gentle one so she won't fall off the horse. She steps forward and he picks her up in an instant, placing her gently on the horse while she thanks him. "How is it? Is it uncomfortable? You can just ride around here a little." However, Hinel doesn't respond. He calls her name and then she mentions that she'll ride it next time as she isn't used to riding in a dress yet. The prince, concerned, asks if she isn't well, mentioning her red cheeks, and she suggests maybe it's because of the cloak. Smiling brightly, he suggests they go inside, and with his help, she's able to get off the horse without issues. Down, she thanks him for the gifts, mentioning it is really too much for her. He tells her the crown princess shouldn't consider those gifts too much, and she insists, but before she can finish, he cuts her off by calling her name. Holding her waist, he remarks, "You said you want me to become an emperor, right? If you become an empress, I'll give you even greater gifts every day. I'll make you the most splendid and noble person in this country." Yeah, so they share a kiss. I know, right? So cute, a wholesome moment. In a new scene, she appears in her room and is greeted by some letters on the table. Da immediately checks them out, and after much observation, she reports that it's from Countess Phil and her mother. She takes the letter, the fragrance of salur enveloping her as she inhales its scent. The first letter is from her mother, who only asks if she is okay and how she is coping with the cold of trichas. Overwhelmed by emotions, tears begin to stream down her face. The next letter Da hands her appears to be from Mia. Inside her, she asked about her well-being and had shared how well she seemed to be getting along with the Count. She also shared that the Count is very busy because of a newly discovered mineral in the mines. Although they don't spend so much time together, he's kind to her, and also he's been injured a lot, but he hates talking about the injuries, so she doesn't know what happened. She finishes the letter, and from the contents, she could tell Mia is doing well. Unlike her, mine has a good family, so Cheddar won't dare treat her back, but it's obvious that when she becomes pregnant he might turn away, but nevertheless, she hopes Mia doesn't go through what she did. On the other hand, the third prince appears stunned by news he receives. The man assures him that if he uses that method, his goal will be achieved soon. Passing him a brown envelope, he mentions he highly hopes he will consider it positively. A few days later, Hinel shares with her maid that she'll like to include some unique items from Trichas while sending a reply to Mia's letter. She suggests high-quality wine or fabric along with the letter, and Da remarks that it's perfect. She asks if she should go prepare the items, however Hinel says no, and mentions that she will bring it up to the prince. In a new scene, she steps out of the prince's office, having found it empty and unable to see him. Moments later, she stands in front of the prince's bedchamber asking to see him. He informs the second prince of the crown princess consort's arrival and waits for his response. Meanwhile, a guard mentions that the prince has been occupied with reorganizing the military command structure. As she turns to leave, intending to return later, the prince's voice calls out, inviting her in. She walks in and is instantly taken aback by how dimly lit his bedroom also is. Almost as if he can read her thoughts, his voice startles her as he mentions it's more soothing when it's dark. Almost similar to how snakes flavor damp environments. Snakes? She mutters in confusion as she walks to him, and in response he tells her she probably wouldn't understand. To his surprise, she mentions she's had similar thoughts herself and explains that back when she was in Salar, she felt like a frog. He raises his head, furrowing his eyebrows, showing complete interest as he asks what she means. With her head low, she begins sharing. The queen's palace was so extravagant that her quarters looked miserable in comparison. The palace was filled with sunlight that she felt uneasy just being near it, and that's when it hit her. She was like a frog trapped in a dark swamp. To survive, she thought she should retreat back to her home. The prince rises and he walks towards her. He comments that unless they change their natures, neither of them will escape the swamp. Sweeping a portion of her hair into his hand, he remarks that it's almost like they're a married couple. She turns her eyes to the side, embarrassed, but quite the opposite. A smile forms on his face, and then he asks, "So shall we also retreat to the shadows of this room?" She tells him it's still daytime, and he brings his head low, his warm breath brushing against her ears as he whispers, "If we stay here, we won't even realize whether it's day or night." She is swept away in the tender moment, as they share a kiss together. The prince pauses and then asks, "So tell me, why are you here?" She shares that she wanted to send a gift to a friend in Salar, and she thought she might appreciate wine or fabric from Salar, so she wanted to ask for his recommendations. He tells her he'll suggest a few types of wine and send a list to her maid later, and she thanks him. Unexpectedly, he brings up the third prince, asking if he's contacted her again recently. He then explains he suspects he's planning something, reminding her he caused her to fall from her horse. He warns her to stay cautious. Now it hits her and her face goes pale as she realized. That's right, the third prince raised an army right after the crown prince's death. The prince notices the shift in her expression and immediately asks if Kyle had approached her again, but she says no. "If Kyle comes near you, inform me immediately. I despise it when anyone lays a hand on what's mine." Now her cheeks go red as she wonders. How strange, His Highness's words make my heart skip a beat. Also, she mentions there's something else she has to share, bringing up how he'd mentioned that the third prince ordered the count to kidnap her. He asks why she's bringing that up now, and she shares that she'd received a letter from Salar, that the count discovered a new mineral in his mine, leaving her to wonder if the third prince's plans could be linked to that discovery. Satisfied, she wonders, if she explains it this way it shouldn't raise any suspicions, right? She recalls hearing about cheddar mineral discovery in her previous life. She was unsure about the exact nature of the mineral, but shortly after, rumors spread that Trika's emperor was gravely ill, so it must be a mineral of great significance. The second prince gives a relieving response. He mentions first, he needs to identify what the mineral actually is. Hinel, relieved, then asks, if they're to trade the mineral, wouldn't they trade it through Baishara? He accepts her suggestion, sharing monitoring that area could reveal something useful. As he watches her leave, he acknowledges she knows quite a lot despite her sheltered life in the palace. He stands in thought. Baishara? Surely trade flourishes there. A smirk forms on his face as he thinks that's an excellent suggestion. Turning around, he decides he should look into Baishara as Hinel had suggested. She goes back to her room and meets Da already waiting, asking if she was able to get any good gift suggestions, and in response she shares that the prince said he would make a recommendation list. Da excited then praises Mia, saying she's really fortunate. She mentions not only did she marry the count, but she's also going to receive an incredibly expensive gift. Da notices something wrong and asks her why she looks that way, and instead she responds with a smile saying it's nothing. Gripping her arm nervously, her kind reels. Da doesn't know anything about what happened so far, and for her, just hearing his name makes her body freeze. Da startles her from her thoughts with a report that someone had come from the Empress's palace while she was away. She then reveals that in a week, the Empress would host an afternoon tea that she is expected to attend, adding that it seems the Trika's imperial family gathers like that regularly. She gets excited as she thinks she's never attended many such gatherings even in Salar. She then asks Da if perhaps she should prepare a gift separately, but Da responds that she isn't sure. Hinel, now realizing it appears no one is welcoming her, resolves to not stay intimidated forever. No matter what, she's still a princess of Trika's, not to mention she can't bring disgrace to the second prince because of her. She rubs her lips, sharing she needs to find out what they like, but Da assures to leave that to her, stating she would have found out by tomorrow. The next day Da pushes her food tray with a bright smile as she shares that she's found out what it is. As she sets her table, she shares that the crown princess enjoys reading books, while the third princess is crazy about jewelry, but the Empress surprisingly is very interested in martial arts. Hinel appears and asks that she slows down a bit, and she accepts. She goes ahead to repeat it this time. She recommends earrings or necklaces for the third princess and for the Empress, since she's very interested in martial arts. A sword crafted by a very famous artisan would make a great gift. Later, the prince with a smile encourages her to make sure everything is of the highest quality no matter the costs, and also to ask the head maid for guidance. Hinel, however, explains she'd like to prepare them by herself since she can't always rely on people for help, and the prince supports her decision. The day of the afternoon tea gathering arrives, and Hinel sits in front of the gifts while Da prepares her hair. Once she is ready, Evan appears and reports that the prince would like to give something to the crown princess consort. She rises as she notices Rutz, who walks in majestically. She tells him she's about to leave soon, and he only says right on time. He extends his hand to her, holding a box. He asks her what it is, and he reveals it is a TAF. He mentions he has prepared a TAF for the third princess, encouraging her to wear it proudly and subtly show it off to the third princess. Confused, Hinel asks if she wouldn't dislike it, but the prince explains that she'll provoke the third princess' jealousy. She'll want it desperately, then, just like feeding a dog, give her the gift you prepared. The prince compliments her pale hands that make the TAF ring shine even brighter, but she turns away embarrassed and slowly mutters that it's time to go. Once she takes her leave with Da, the prince signals to Evans and reveals he wants a full report on everything that happens that day. She arrives at the greenhouse and is captivated by the sight of that which she's never seen, a greenhouse made of ice. The Empress invites her in and retorts, "I have opened my most cherished garden, so I hope you enjoy it to the fullest." Hinel goes down and thanks her for her consideration, and just like the second prince had said, once Yoba Trika's, the third princess's eyes land on the gem in the ring, a TAF, she quickly grows agitated. Once she takes her seat, she exchanges greetings with the two princesses that when she goes quiet, the Empress calls her and asks, "Is there some issue between you and the second prince?" Hinel responds saying the prince is very kind to her. In response, the Empress retorts that she sees before proceeding to ask, "Then why is it that you two can't have a child?" She continues, stating she's heard the two of them meet every day, so if there's still not a child between them, isn't it the second crown princess's problem? Lost in thought, Hinel ponders. Even though they meet every day, they don't always share a bed. Also, even if the second prince had a successor, it would only interfere with the throne, so the Empress probably only mentioned that to try and find fault. Suddenly a voice startles her back to reality. The Empress urges her to undergo a checkup to make sure she's fine, and she agrees. Turning to the crown princess, she asks if she's been taking proper care of the crown prince, sharing she'd heard from the personal doctor that his health has worsened. The crown princess apologizes. Hinel questioning if it's really always so uncomfortable whenever they meet that she can't even take a sip of tea, resolves to change the atmosphere. She shares she has prepared something and asks if it's okay to bring them out now. She signals the head maid to bring them out, and once she brings them she explains that since it's the first time they are all gathering, she has prepared a gift. The third princess however scoffs at her statement, saying it's probably just a souvenir from Salar or perhaps a dress. Hinel however assures her that there's no need to worry, stating she hadn't prepared a dress. She places the first present in front of the Empress, a sword made by the best craftsman of Trikas. She opens the box, and as she holds it, she remarks that it's a sword of Hanston Mashal, saying no one can match his refining technique. Hinel remarks that she recognized it right away, and the Empress replies that she also owns a Mashal sword. Looking satisfied, she thanks her, saying it must have been especially hard to get. For the Crown Princess, she gives her a book by Leo the Mayor, a master of the humanities. She recalls the prince's words about provoking the third princess's jealousy. Just like feeding a dog, she can give her the gift she's prepared. She exclaims in excitement at the sight of the TAF necklace seated in the box. The Empress resolves to keep an eye on Hinel. She has an unexpected sense in choosing the gifts. The Empress then asks if she'd chosen the gifts herself, and she says yes, and also adds that the second prince was of great help too. The Empress remarks that they're all rare items, calling her impressive. Hinel shares that she prepared the gifts as a gesture of gratitude for inviting her there. If she continues like that, she wonders if she could establish herself there. Of course, she wouldn't forget the most important thing, to become close to the Crown Princess and look after the Crown Prince's condition. With a bright smile, she shares her hope that they can meet often, and the Empress in response tells her she'll try to set up a meeting often. In a new scene, the Crown Princess discloses that she's read the book she gave her. He commends the content and asks if perhaps she'd read it too, but Hinel says she hasn't read it yet. The Crown Princess asks if she usually likes books, and she tells her she reads a lot in Salar, but it's hard to find time to do so in Trikas. Hinel then asks her if there's a special reason she enjoys reading, and the Crown Princess reveals it's not exactly a reason. She mentions that ever since the Crown Prince went ill, no one knows the cause, so out of frustration she read many books, trying everything. In the end, she got used to reading books, even eventually she encountered other books. With a hesitant smile, she also shared she might have become obsessed with books since she had no one to confide in. Hinel then assures her if she ever needs someone to confide in, she could always come to her, adding that it'll be nice to talk and read together. However, the Crown Princess unexpectedly asks her not to worry about her. Hinel, not backing down, explains that it's not that, but instead she can only imagine how lonely she must have been, that she only wanted to understand those feelings, and she thanks her. In a new scene, the second prince mentions her relations with the Crown Princess of recent. The second prince then warns her to be careful, stating his brother the Crown Prince is just as much a rival as Kyle. Hinel with a smile reassures him, stating the Crown Princess is a good person, and sometimes she gives her updates on the Crown Prince's health. News? The second prince mutters. Hinel then shares that the prince's health has been deteriorating rapidly recently, adding that if he were to pass away, the third prince wouldn't stay still, because of course it would be his chance to rise to the throne. But why are you, Hinel, so concerned with keeping Kyle in check? The prince sharply retorts. Now her heart races as she realized she just got caught up in the moment and continued oversharing. Placing his silverware on the table, he remarks that it's strange. The Emperor of Trikas is me, and it's also my responsibility to keep Kyle in check, but you, Hinel, seem so keen on understanding every situation. Hinel nervously explains that she's only worried about him. The second prince however acknowledges her worry, saying he knows, after what had happened because of Kyle. I couldn't protect you enough because I have no power. Her gaze softens as she calls him, but he assures her not to worry, stating he's also keeping an eye on their movements. He tells her if she keeps worrying it'll make him feel like she doesn't trust him. He assured her he'll always be by her side, while she thinks every night when she goes to bed she still dreams of that moment. To her the Count is terrifying that even when she's alone, she gets so anxious thinking he might show up again. When she wakes up like that she feels restless that she can't fall back asleep. The second prince calls her and when she responds he shares that he'd received a report earlier that day. Illegal mineral trafficking has been detected in Bishara. She asks if the Count is involved but he tells her he doesn't know yet. He also explains that he could arrest him but first he needs to trace the route so he's left him alone for the time being. She asks if he's found out what mineral it is they're trading and he discloses that he is still unsure of how dangerous it is but it seems to be an explosive mineral. Immediately she goes pale, she grasps her hand tightly as she realizes now, that was why Cheddar looked so pleased. She remarks that if it's an explosive mineral, it could also be used as a weapon, maybe to make bombs or cannons, and the prince reveals. If the Count and Kyle have joined forces, turning the mineral into a weapon won't be difficult, they could also use it to secure fines but either way it still poses a threat to him. Hinel then suggests taking actions would be best and the prince agrees thinking, he's always thought that but Hinel's insights are quite helpful. Now she ponders her previous life questioning if in her past life, Cheddar also allied himself with the third prince since alone the third prince wouldn't have been able to defeat the second prince. This time she resolves to respond correctly and unexpectedly the prince comments that she's making that sane face again. Don't worry, I'll take action before that bastard Kyle does anything, he reassures her. Later, the Empress sits alone with a strange feeling. Before in moments like that he used to drink alone while worrying. Trapped in the obsession that he had to solve the situation as soon as possible, however now, he doesn't feel any anxiety. He leans back in his chair, his thoughts consuming him. Until now he always thought he couldn't trust anyone, but for some reason he wants to trust Hinel. A few days later, the prince stands observant when a man comes and greets him, noting it's been a while. The prince then asks for someone who should be locked away in the palace like a flower what brings him there, but he responds saying calling a man a flower is quite a bold remark. First he hands him a scroll. The prince, confused, asks what that is and he explains it's an imperial order regarding the military training of that day. The prince asks him what it says and the man responds saying he hadn't dared to pry, however upon receiving the order he naturally ended up finding out. The prince then asks if he always talks that much, but the man tells him sometimes when he talks a lot, unexpected solutions come to his mind. The prince opening the scroll remarks that he speaks as though there's a problem to solve and the man commends his observation, calling it sharp. The prince, tired of the back and forth, finally asks what his real purpose is. The man adjusting his glasses then asks if he would like to make a deal with him. The prince observed him for a moment before turning away, suggesting they talk in some place that is quieter. When they're alone the man asks if he's heard of a place called Roxand. The prince's eyes immediately darken as he wonders what he's up to, revealing he's heard of it before. Even sharing it is known as the land of freezing winters. The man backs him up saying he's right and shares that lately someone has been going in and out of that place frequently. The prince, without wasting any more time, then asks if the deal perhaps is about telling him who it is, and the man's expression immediately changes as he praises his wit. The man then shares that long ago, the third prince asked him if he knew of a secluded and quiet place, saying he wants to rest in a place without people. He proceeds and shares that at that moment without thinking he mentioned Roxand, but after more consideration, it appears strange, as it is not a suitable place to rest. The prince thanks him for the information and then asks why he's telling him all that. He continues saying if that is a deal, there must be something he wants from him. The man with a smile mentions even though he called it a deal it's nothing grand, instead he just wants the prince to bring peace and prosperity to Trikas. The prince however remarks that doing that is bigger than it sounds, while the man asks really? Leaning in he mentions it's a secret, but I believe that your highness will be the next emperor of this country. The prince doesn't appear moved and instead asks if he's designated him the next heir to the throne, and the man responds saying of course. However, he continues stating, if his highness the second prince threatens Trikas, he can step back at any time. The prince, lowering his head, then mutters that if anyone hears the prime minister they would think he's the emperor himself. The prime minister however laughs it off, saying he only tries to offer frank advice to the emperor and their highnesses to guide them on the right path, mentioning he'd given several warnings to the third prince but he didn't understand them. He continues, stating he would help him inherit the throne without trouble, so as he mentioned previously, he should strive for the peace and prosperity of the country. The prince then ponders on it. Having a competent official as an ally is not a bad idea, in fact, it is something he should be grateful for. So if the prime minister's words are true, there is no reason to refuse them, so he makes a request. Then could you make me a promise? He asks, and then goes ahead to whisper his request to the prime minister. Later, Hinel sits in her office alone when something attracts her attention. She rises to her feet as soon as she notices the second prince walk in, and the second prince walking towards her shares that he's heard Kyle frequently visits Roxanne. He reveals his suspicions, that he's plotting a rebellion there, leaving her shocked. The prince however continues by mentioning that Hakel told him that day, he said he would support him as the heir to the throne. All the while Hinel ponders. The third prince is truly planning to raise an army. In my past life I was caught off guard, but now that I know the situation I can prepare. Besides, the prime minister also supports Ruts. This time I will not fall to Cheddar as I did in my past life. She brings up the mineral he discovered, and the prince suggests they pay an extra price and divert it from his hands. Clenching her fists strongly, she's unable to get over the fact that he considered her suggestion, and now, she asks what he plans to do next. The prince, without hesitation, reveals he must first obtain proof of Kyle's preparation for betrayal and then stop him. She asks if he has the emperor's approval, however he falls silent. She asks if he doesn't wish to inform him, and he explains that until he obtains proof, he plans to act in secret as much as possible, since by informing the king he could risk their strategy being exposed. Unexpectedly he pats her head and says she understands well. He also mentions it was thanks to her that they secured the mineral, but she turns her head, saying it was nothing and she only did what she should as his wife. The prince with a smile then reveals he's glad to know she doesn't regret getting married to him. No. If I hadn't married you, it would have been a disaster. Thanks to you, some of the burdens that have always weighed on my heart seem to be starting to lighten. She rubs her head gently against his palm, thinking she hadn't expected the prince to ever say something like that to her. Is he really opening his heart to me? She tightens her hand as she thinks she also wants to reciprocate his feelings. She doesn't know if she'll succeed, but she'll try to do something that can help him. She speaks and says if he's investigating the third prince, she'll look for something she can do in the palace. He asks what, and she replies saying she'll try to get close to the third princess consort, but he asks if she thinks she will pay attention to her. She then mentions that when no one is in the palace the third prince might give some order, and the prince commends her, saying she has more determination than he thought. He shares he believed her to be fragile and worried easily, and she turns her head to the side, thanking him for the compliment. Again he pats her head, encouraging her to do her best, also disclosing that the third princess consort enjoys ice fishing, advising her to make good use of that. He turns around, noting he will take his leave now, and as she watches the door shut, she mutters word of gratitude to him. Thank you, Your Highness. A few days later, the third prince received permission to leave the palace. The reason was a conflict among the northern residents, and he said he would resolve it personally. In a new scene, Hinel asks the prince if the third prince is heading to Roxanne, and he says probably. He shares he also needs to find a pretext to follow Kyle. She mentions he would be very busy, but the prince only insists that he needs to obtain proof. Looking at her, he retorts that it seems she doesn't want him to leave. Flustered, she mentions that's not it, and instead, she's just worried he might get hurt. The prince then mentions if she's really worried, she could wish him luck in battle. Suddenly a suggestion pops in her mind, and she asks if he would like her to make a belt ornament for him. She explains that Intrika's ornaments are woven with threads for those going to battle, and he accepts, saying that doesn't sound like a bad idea. With flushed cheeks he shares he will prepare the thread through Evan and send it to her room the next day. Looking down, Hinel considers how once that night passes, she wouldn't be able to see the prince so easily anymore. He will secretly follow the third prince around and obtain proof, then he will report to the emperor, after which there will be a battle. The prince's voice startles her back to reality as he mentions he feels bad about it too. So before he leaves, he'd like to spend some time with her. She turns her head away in embarrassment that the prince asks if she doesn't want to, but she shares that it's quite the opposite, actually she would like that. He strokes her lips gently before going in for a kiss, and that's all for this episode, guys. Stay tuned, and don't forget to like, subscribe and leave a comment. Also don't forget to comment down what you think would happen next, and the next video will be a part 2 for the manhwa where she pretends to be vulgar to break off her engagement to the ruthless Archduke, so do watch out for it, and thank you guys for your support. I really appreciate you guys, thank you.